Hi, in this video, I'm going to present about the sampling, survey, and the questionnaire design. The objective of learning this chapter are demonstrate a knowledge of the 4 basic sampling methods, recognize some of the factors that can bias response. Why sample? People use sample for any statistical study because it saves time and money to get the information that he or she might not be able to obtain otherwise, and to get more detailed information about a particular subject of the study. There are 2 types of samples. The first one is the unbiased sample. This sample is chosen at random from a population. Conversely, if a sample is selected incorrectly, it may be a biased sample. So, when some type of systematic error has been made in the selection of the subject, then the sample is biased. Moreover, there are several types of biased samples. The first one, sampling or selection bias. This bias occurs when some subjects are more likely to be included in a statistical survey or study than others. The second is non-response bias. This bias occurs when subjects who do not respond to a survey question would answer it differently than those who do respond to it. The third is response or interviewer bias. This occurs when the subject gives a different response than he or she truly believes. The fourth and last is volunteer bias. This bias occurs when the volunteers are used since they might be more interested in the survey or study and answer the question or participate differently than randomly selected subjects. The most common methods that the researcher will use to obtain the unbiased samples are random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. Random sampling. For a sample of size n, all possible samples of this size have an equal chance of being selected from the population. To conduct a random sampling, the preferred way is to use the random numbers generated by a computer. So how to use the random numbers generated by a computer? This figure shows the example of random numbers generated by a computer, and this is a standard random numbers that we can use to take a sample. So the concept is, first we number the elements of the population sequentially, and then we select each person by using the random number. So later I will show you how to use this random number table. The limitation of use this random sampling is, if the population is extremely large, it is time consuming to number and select the sample elements. Let's say we consider all names of states in United States as follows. First, we number all the names of states according to the alphabet like this, and then refer to the random number. You can start any point, but for this case we start at this number 27, and from this number we take 10 numbers to see the samples. And then for any number without an item or a name, you can remove from the sample. And then for any numbers that's similar with the previous, you can remove one of them until you get all these samples. And from this sample, actually you can refer back to the random number, and all these number with circle actually indicating these 10 samples out of the population just now. Systematic sampling. To do the systematic sampling, first, you select some random starting point from the population, and then you select every k element, for example the 3rd, the 5th, the 10th, from the population to be included in the sample. So by considering this population, let's say we consider number 4, Arkansas, and from number 4, the next number will be +5, and the following numbers +5, +5, and until you get the 10 element as your sample. Stratified sampling. In this type of sampling, we need to divide the population into subgroups called strata according to various homogeneous characteristics and then randomly select the members out of each stratum for the sample. The advantage of using this sampling is it ensures representation of all population subgroups that are important to the study. However, there are two major drawbacks of using this type of sampling. First, if there are many variables of interest, dividing a large population into representative subgroups requires a great deal of effort. Second, if the variables are somewhat complex or ambiguous, it is difficult to separate individuals into subgroups according to these variables. So for example, let's say we have this data with the name of the person, the gender, and the year in university. So FR stands for freshman, SO stands for sophomore. And then we group each of these elements from the population into 4 groups as follows. So the first group for male and freshman, and group 2 female and freshman, and accordingly. Then for group 1 you choose the element number 4 and number 5. Group 2 you choose element number 2 and number 5. Group 3 you choose element number 1 and number 3. And group 4 you choose element number 3 and number 4. So all this becomes your sample. Lastly, cluster sampling. By using this cluster sampling, we need to select a pre-existing or natural group called a cluster and using the members in the cluster for the sample. So the 3 advantages of using this type of sampling are: first, reduce cost; second, simplify fieldwork; third, convenient. However, the elements in a cluster may not have the same variations in characteristics as elements selected individually from the population. The reason is the groups of people may be more homogeneous in specific clusters. So one of the examples of conducting this cluster sampling in university is you select a group of sample from the same course. In this section, I will explain about survey. There are 2 types of surveys. The first one is interviewer-administered survey. This type of survey required a person to ask the question. So the interview can be conducted face-to-face or via telephone. The second is self-administered survey. This type of surveys can be done by mail, email, or computer, or in a group setting such as a classroom. You can also use this type of survey by using the Google form, which you need to create the question in the Google form and distribute the questionnaire through email. So when you are writing question for a questionnaire, for example in a Google form, it is important to avoid these common mistakes. The first common mistake is asking biased questions. By asking questions in certain way, the researcher can lead the respondents to answer in the way he or she wants them to. So for example, asking a question such as, are you going to vote for candidate A even though many people say that he will lose the election, instead of, are you going to vote for candidate A? The second is using confusing words. In this case, the participant might misinterprets the meaning of the words and answers in the questionnaire. For example, the question, do you think people would live longer if they were on a diet? This question could be misinterpreted since there are many different types of diets. The third one is asking double-barreled question. So sometimes the question contains compound sentences that require the participant to respond to 2 questions at the same time. For example, are you in favor of a national healthcare program? And do you favor a tax to support it? So this kind of example like asking the same question but 2 different sentences. The fourth is using double negative questions. Questions with double negative can be confusing to the respondents as well. So for example, the question, do you feel that it is not appropriate to have areas where people cannot smoke? The fifth and the last is ordering question improperly. Last but not least, after you create the questionnaire form, you need to do a pilot study to test the design and the usage of the questionnaire. You need to make sure the questionnaire is reliable and unbiased before you distribute to the respondent to get the information. Thank you.